Good evening, my friends. Before we enter into the holy season of Lent, we shall see another healing miracle of Jesus for this 6th Sunday of the year. Like the cure of Simon Peter's mother-in-law, Jesus healed the leper by touching him, thus making him whole again. But this time, he commanded him to go to the priest and offer a sacrifice, something that the law required. Jesus, by following the law, was not only obedient to God, he revealed he is the Messiah of God. A leper came to Jesus and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it, be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Obviously, our story centers on a man with leprosy, which in the Bible is a term to refer to any skin disease. Actually, there is still no consensus if biblical leprosy was an ailment of the skin or the disease that we commonly know today as Hansen's disease. Maybe we just have to understand each case according to the context of the story. But the more important thing about this leper were the implications of this disease on him. 1. If this is really the leprosy that we know today, then it is a serious case, highly contagious, and even deadly. In fact, those who were suffering from leprosy at that time were often called the living dead, because your body slowly decays while you are still alive. Literally, it's terminally killing you very slowly. 2. The stress caused by the leprosy was not so much due to physical discomfort or health deterioration, but to the kind of isolation it brings to the person. Leprosy is like a curse that brings about social isolation as well as religious discrimination. You would be distanced from men. You would also be separated from your God. We now talk of social distancing or 14-day quarantine. Well, a leper in ancient times already suffered both and much worse. 3. The physical distancing from people brings with it a moral connotation. The sickness renders the person morally or spiritually unclean. He could not join their worship assembly because he was ritually unclean. Lepers had to admit such a condition when among the people. He had to shout, "Unclean, unclean," to warn people to stay away from him. This is the law of cleanliness according to the book of Leviticus, which is our first reading. For the Jews, it was this state of uncleanness that must be contained, because uncleanness was contagious. It can make others unclean. But for the Jews, what it spreads was not the disease, but uncleanness. Meaning to say that if a healthy person will have a direct contact with the leprous person, he won't be considered a leper, which normally happens, but an unclean or defiled person. A leper was not only shunned physically, that is, he has no social life. He is above all separated spiritually, that is, has no spiritual connection with God, because he is forbidden to join their worship. That's not all. What made the situation far worse was the added belief that because of the seriousness of his condition, a leper, and therefore unclean, he must have also done something very sinful. A leper, unclean, and also a sinner. Could anything be worse than that? That was the situation of the leper, a most pitiable and wretched state of affairs. Last week, I mentioned that sickness and the worst kind of suffering could ultimately drive anybody to despair. If sickness can do that to a person, you can now imagine the utter hopelessness caused by leprosy. And this is what triggered the reaction of Jesus. Upon the appeal of the leper, St. Mark described Jesus as being moved with pity. The Greek word used here was the word we've heard several times before, splanchnizomai, literally deep groaning, or what we call moved to the core. Now, my friends, this word was seldom used in the scriptures, and almost all the time was used only to describe Jesus. St. Mark considers the emotion of Jesus very, very crucial. It is through these human sentiments of Jesus that we now discover not only Jesus' authentic humanity, his compassion to seemingly hopeless human situations, but also the power and healing love of God. The human compassion of Jesus conveys divine compassion. Jesus' love for his fellow men and women is the channel through which God's love flows to men and women. Without feeling empathy to the suffering of the people, there would be no miracles. If the compassion of Jesus manifested his humanity, the pitiable cry of the leper revealed Jesus' divinity. You see, there is more to it than just a simple request of a seriously wounded man. The leper said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Notice that he did not ask Jesus to cure him of his sickness. He did not say, "Lord, please heal me. Rid me of this disease." No, he said, to make him clean. Meaning to say that what's more important for the leper is to be made clean in order to worship God, rather than to be physically healthy. He was more concerned to be able to go back to God than to be back into the community, to be with the religious community rather than human society. Look at the priorities of this poor leper. We can have a further insight on this man's request if we compare it with another similar healing in the Old Testament, the healing of the Syrian general from leprosy by the prophet Elisha. We find that story in the second book of Kings, although this is not our first reading today. Naaman, the Syrian general, goes to the Israelite king to be cured. But the king said, "Am I a God to give death and life?" He said, "For him to send the man to me and ask me to cure him of his disease?" In the Old Testament, the assumption was, only God can cure leprosy. That's how serious it was at that time. Only God can cure leprosy. And now in our story, when the leper comes to Jesus and says, "If you will, you can make me clean," he was showing faith precisely in the divinity of Jesus. How do we know he exhibited faith? He knelt down, prostrated himself before Jesus. Kneeling and prostration are gestures you do only to the divine. With that simple plea on bended knees, the leper saw Jesus not only as the King of Israel, not only as the Messiah, but in a sense, as the Son of God, God Himself, because he believed that Jesus possesses divine powers of healing. And thus, we can now appreciate the response of Jesus. And notice again the use of St. Mark of the word immediately, which I mentioned last week. The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. This does not only emphasize the dynamism of Jesus' ministry, but most especially His power. In other words, it doesn't take Jesus 10 months to heal a leper, not even 2 months or 1 day. He can heal a person instantaneously because He has complete power over sickness, over suffering, and eventually we shall see over death itself, which is what leprosy is. Another indication of the power of Jesus was revealed in the simple detail when He stretched out His hand and touched him. I mentioned earlier that ancient leprosy was doubly contagious. It could contaminate you physically, turn you into a leper. It would also make you unclean. So anybody touching a leper will be himself impure. But look at what happened. Instead of Jesus being contaminated and being made ritually unclean when He touched the leper, it was the leper who was contaminated by the power of Jesus and was made clean. The touch that would have made Jesus unclean instead healed the man and restored him to ritual purity. Oh, what a difference the touch of Jesus can make. How shall we make of the rather unusual command of Jesus to the leper? He actually had 2 commands for the leper. Then, warning him sternly, He dismissed him at once and said, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." Once again, like in the 2 previous Sundays, and now, here, Jesus warned those He healed to keep quiet and not announce to the people what He had done to them. The silence that Jesus demanded from His healings is what is famously known as the Messianic secret, which is an important feature in St. Mark's Gospel. The secret is about Jesus' identity, that He is really the promised Messiah, the Son of God, who would finally fulfill God's promises of old and liberate the people of Israel. At this point in the young rabbi's early ministry, he was still discovering this identity and his powers. That's the reason for the command of silence. He didn't want people to misunderstand Him to be other than a spiritual Savior and not a political Messiah or a military liberator. But did the healed leper keep quiet? The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to Him from everywhere. The man immediately told everyone he met about the miracle, such that Jesus couldn't go anymore to the town as he wanted to in order to spread the good news, but had to stay outside the towns, usually near the gates of the town. But the people kept coming to Him from everywhere. Why? Because they now considered Him as the new Elisha, who, like in the Old Testament, cured leprosy. So the people must have thought, if He can cure leprosy, which is the worst kind of disease, what disease can He not cure? Jesus can certainly cure everything. The second command of Jesus to the leper was to go to the priest in Jerusalem. and offer a sacrifice in the temple as prescribed by Moses. Why go to the priest? Because contracting leprosy and being cured from it had more to do with their religion than with health or hygiene. Since being unclean because of leprosy is a religious and ritual designation, then it would involve the priests in the temple. They are the ones to examine and render judgment if the person has leprosy or not, thus making a judgment that a person is unclean or clean respectively. This is also contained in our first reading. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "If someone has on his skin a scab or pustule or blotch, which appears to be the sore of leprosy, he shall be brought to Aaron, the priest, or to one of the priests among his descendants. If the man is leprous and unclean, the priest shall declare him unclean by reason of the sore on his head. If the priest would determine that a person is already healed of leprosy, this person has the obligation to offer a sacrifice of 2 pigeons or 2 lambs, if he has the means. One of the animals will be sacrificed or killed, while the other will be set free in the form of a scapegoat. This ritual explains the idea of redemption. In order for one to be set free, another has to take his place and be sacrificed in his stead. This is what Christ did for us, for our redemption from sin. Instead of us dying for our sins, He substituted Himself and offered Himself to die on the cross for us. Then the healed person would wash himself and his clothes after offering the sacrifice so that he can now be reinstated and join the community in worship. Jesus told the healed man to go to the priest because he is the only one who can formally admit him into community and worship as an official witness. Obeying the verdict of the priest to offer the sacrifice and cleanse oneself will be the public testimony that he was finally cleansed of leprosy and as proof to the people. The second reading from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians teaches that the church is one community in spite of the diversity of cultures and practices. The Jews who became Christians and the pagans who became Christians obviously have differing practices and beliefs, especially in their dietary and food practices. But both groups that St. Paul addressed form now one church, and there are only 2 basic principles of unity that must be followed: glorifying God and sensitivity of conscience for the welfare of others. Brothers and sisters, whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do, do everything for the glory of God. Avoid giving offense, whether to the Jews or Greeks or to the Church of God. Just as I try to please everyone in every way, not seeking my own benefit, but that of the many, that they may be saved. Be imitators of me, as I am of Christ. The healing of the leprous man began when Jesus touched him. The fever left Simon Peter's mother-in-law when Jesus touched her and raised her up. The healing touch of Jesus will always be there for us to receive. The problem is, are we willing to be touched by Jesus and thus be healed? More significantly, do we want to go and touch Jesus? Last week, I enjoined us to touch Jesus with our pains and sufferings, because He is ever close to us, whatever happens to us. The lesson now for us is to touch Jesus with our faith. The leper approached Jesus brought about by a great need. In a way, he was forced by circumstance. But what conquered Jesus was his humble attitude. He knelt down, prostrated himself to acknowledge that it is God who is in front of him. Now, no longer forced by circumstance, he expressed great faith in Jesus and asked for healing, both for body and soul. We Catholics kneel down in the church, unlike many other denominations. Make that gesture a moment of grace, a moment of healing, a moment when Jesus will touch you to heal you. Every time you do that, kneel down with great humility and even with greater faith. Then your healing not only begins, your healing will be complete. And God bless us all.